everyone, and welcome to our webinar. My name is Scott Ballinger, and I am with Zymewire. Very excited to have, looks like we have multiple attendees from over 100 different companies today on May 20th. And if you think about May 20th, all the way back in 1609, Shakespeare published first poems and sonnets on May 20th in 1609. And then on May 20th in 1927, Charles Lindbergh flew the Spirit of St. Louis from New York to Paris, France on May 20th. And then in 1990, the Hubble Space Telescope broadcast the first picture from space back to Earth on May 20th. And with the guests that we have lined up, along with my colleague Anne-Marie, years from now, they may talk about this webinar as being something else historic that happened on May 20th. So we're glad you're a part of it. Let me do some introductions and overview of how we intend to spend the next hour. So let's just go to the agenda slide. There's our topic. And as I said, we've got some great guest speakers that are very uniquely situated in the cell and gene therapy marketplace. And they themselves work directly with cell and gene therapy companies, but they also have a front row seat on how the executive teams at these cell and gene therapy companies interact with their partners and solution providers. So it's going to be some great insights that we'll have. And joining us from Philadelphia is Sergio Armani. He is VP of Business Development at Advarra, and Advarra is an integrated research compliance solutions company. Sergio is also on the board of the Association of Clinical Research Professionals. And he has a very unique lens on the clinical development challenges that cell and gene therapy companies face. And Advarra has become a leader in understanding some of the compliance considerations around gene therapy development. So always good to see you, Sergio. Next, we have joining us from London, Nick Stevens. Nick is the president of the RSA Group, and that is one of the leading executive search and placement firms for the cell and gene therapy space. Nick's teams are brought in by the investors as they're about to launch and build a new cell and gene therapy company, as well as by established cell and gene therapy companies that are looking to build out their executive suite as they go into their next phase of growth. So welcome from London, Nick. And then we also have Janelle Firestein, and she is a partner at Clarkston Consulting, and she is joining us from Detroit. Janelle is the life science lead for Clarkston, and she has become a thought leader and a go-to resource in the cell therapy segment of cell and gene therapy. And she also works with CROs, CDMOs around the areas of supply chain, quality, and regulatory challenges. Welcome, Janelle. So when we set out to put this webinar together for you, we put together a team to do some preparation and research. And as soon as we sat down with our guest speakers and some others from their companies, of course, themes started to emerge. And one of the key themes that came up was empathy, and the empathy that's needed to work with cell and gene therapy companies because of some of the unique things that they are doing and the unique challenges that they have. So you'll hear each of our speakers sort of develop their viewpoints on this empathy theme as we go through each of their sections. And each speaker will bring to you some advice and a perspective on that. And it comes from their day-to-day direct interactions with cell and gene therapy companies. So how we will proceed is I will turn things over to my colleague Anne-Marie in just a moment, and she'll share some of the perspective that Zymewire has on the life science BD community and how we sort of have a pulse on what the needs are and challenges there. And then I'll take back over and talk with Nick about his perspectives on the patient-centric nature of cell and gene therapy development, as well as the high caliber of executives that are running these companies and what they expect from their solution providers. Then Janelle and I will speak to the heightened information needs that cell and gene therapy companies have and the timeliness of that information and the demands on that. And Sergio and I will finish it up with looking at the complexity of cell and gene therapy and the sense of urgency that comes with the development of these therapies. We'll go back to Anne-Marie, and she will describe some of the follow-up that we'll have beyond the webinar, some of the sort of parting gifts, as I might call them, for each of you as participants and what you can expect. And we'll leave time for Q&A, because even in advance of starting the webinar, we got questions from all over the globe from you guys about this topic, and we'll do our best to answer them and have our experts weigh in on anything we don't get to. I will be sure that we follow up with you by email. So with that, Anne Marie, would you like to talk a little bit about the context and perspective that Zymewire has, and then how we're going to spend the rest of the hour?
Yeah, thanks so much, Scott, and welcome everyone. My name's Anne Marie. I'm a business development manager here at Zymewire, and I'm on the customer acquisition team. And I'm going to walk through the goal of the webinar and how we kind of wanted to structure this webinar for our community. And as I was reflecting back on how the cell and gene topic came about, I was thinking there's not a whole lot of companies out there that are in our positions where we get to talk to clients that basically cover all aspects of the drug development process and all therapeutic areas. So really, to get a good pulse on the market, just through our conversations with our clients, we found that it was so apparent that cell and gene therapies were really, really dominant. So we thought, oh, let's put together a webinar and use some insights from Zymewire, obviously ask some experts in the field, like the panelists that we have today, to really give you some good perspective on how to partner with cell and gene therapies and what's different with that space in comparison to legacy pharma, right? So in just a little bit of background on the Zymewire community, we have been in this space for a long time, 10 years, and we work with the top service providers in the CRO space, in the CDMO space. We've got clients all over the globe, but more importantly, we have amazing conversations with our clients that lead to these webinars. So you can take our word for it, but I think that Jim Foster says it even better. This is a quote that he's actually said when Charles River Laboratory actually acquired Cognitive Bioscience, and he said that there's about $20 billion that's being invested in cell and gene therapies, and that's fueling 2,000 programs. That the majority of those programs are in the preclinical space. And he goes on in saying in this quote that $1.5 billion is actually the addressable market that he's looking at today. And that market is growing at 25% in the next 5 years. So an explosive growth is in this market. So when we put together this webinar, we thought, okay, we've got an hour. How do we put all of this complex information into 1 hour to help our community be confident when doing partnership with cell and gene therapies? And I have to admit, I'm sure a lot of you on the other end of the screen here are thinking, there's no way they're going to do that. And you're right, it's very complex, it's a very nuanced field, and there's a lot to talk about. But what we thought we would do here at Zymewire and bring that to you at the end of the webinar is actually put together a map, a very comprehensive map on how the heck do you find your way around the cell and gene therapy. This map, I'll tell you more about it towards the end, but essentially think of it as a way of understanding where your companies are lying in this space and what kind of questions you can ask yourself when you're putting other companies into boxes. So more to come on that. So the way the webinar will be structured, I think, Scott, you alluded to that, but we have lots of clients on the line and potential other and non-clients as well listening. And a lot of you have experience in legacy pharma, right? Like small molecule, biologic proteins. And you're asking us, what's different in the partnerships with cell and gene companies? So the way the webinar will be structured is in that each panelist will have factors that differentiate the cell and gene therapies from these other legacy pharma. And underlying those factors is the idea of empathy, which each of the panelists will expand on. So I'm going to pass it back to Scott, and he'll introduce our first panelist.
Thanks, Anne Marie. Yes, and let's get started. So Nick is our first panelist that we'll speak with, and thank you again for joining us, Nick, from London. Your observations in building out some of these executive teams are going to be very interesting, but could you just tell us a little bit more about how and when you become involved, and maybe overview one or two examples of when your team is engaged by either investors or a cell and gene therapy team?
Absolutely. Delighted to be here, Scott, and thank you to everybody for the opportunity to talk with you and to engage. Most usually we get involved around the Series B phase when serious investors move into cell and gene companies, but more and more we're working across the spectrum as larger and larger organizations are creating their own cell and gene units or investing into other cell and gene businesses. So now we're going from large pharma through to private equity backed businesses. But the core of what we do is in that venture space. And that's typically because I think the investors across the world see cell and gene as an enormous opportunity. But the other thing they see, I think, is a playbook. In some way, they've seen, the ability to manipulate DNA or DNA as software as a de-risking of the normally binary aspects of a drug development.
Very good. Yes. And when we were preparing, I remember that being a distinct difference that you see. And, as we think about the empathy theme and the fact that you're there when the investors are getting serious about taking something from an idea, to production, that's just got to be an amazing time of those formative years. But share a little bit more about what you saw around the empathy and the patient centricity of the mission-driven aspects of the executives that sign up for this kind of tour of duty.
Oh, absolutely. So you see that because what we see with cell and gene therapy is the scientific discovery translation into a corporate entity is much, much faster than you normally see. These are incredibly expert, usually physician scientists, who have a deep engagement with a particular patient population. And that translates through to the organization, right? So with cell and gene therapy, you are able to address previously incurable diseases. You're able to make an enormous difference, and quite often a once-off difference that transforms the lives of children and adults. And because of that, this commitment and the focus on the patient is the key. And if you add to that the fact that the investment community and now a lot of the leadership community do see a playbook, and it's a playbook that goes faster than a typical small molecule or even an antibody therapeutic, because the steps are becoming better and better defined. What that means is the one thing that unites everybody and stops people tripping up is that empathy for the patient, that desire to bring something quickly into human beings, into clinical trials, through trials, and out into their healthcare systems. And it's a beautiful North Star that almost everybody in this space follows.
Yeah, you paint a really vivid picture of what it's like. And maybe before we dive into the differences here that you've outlined, as a BD, as representing our BD community and being a business developer myself, these executive teams, they're physician scientists. You've referenced, that they're going to be extremely dedicated, as well as at the very forefront of where science is. Can you share a little bit about what their expectations might be of their solution providers and just the types of interactions that's going to bring from our points of view?
Oh, sure. And I'm sure I can't see your audience, but I'm pretty sure that everybody out there, when they look at themselves in the mirror every morning, I think you all know that if you do your job well today, and if you do your job well tomorrow, then in some small way you've contributed to helping people get better, right? That's why I get up in the morning. That's why I do what I do. And that's your common ground. That's your common ground with probably anybody in this space, but I'm going to denigrate a bit. In big pharma, in small molecule discovery, there's also an element of I'm doing this and I know it could fail, or I'm doing this because Wall Street wants me to do this, right? It's the alignment, though, with the investors, the patients, and the executive in these kinds of organizations is almost perfect. And they have to believe that you believe that too. So that's I would say the absolute cornerstone of the ability to interact well with cell and gene therapy companies is they have to have the confidence that you can do your work, but you wouldn't be in business if you couldn't. They have to understand that you can do this at pace and that you'll stand behind them at their shoulder as they run fast towards that North Star. And the thing that will convince them of that is that you're their ambassador inside your business.
Very
that
good.
You believe in their mission and you want to be a part of it.
Very good. Thank you. And I know everyone was listening, if not taking notes on what those expectations are as we interact with this type of mission-driven company. So Nick, here, some really interesting comparisons to sort of traditional or small molecule pharma across these categories. Take some time and just walk us through this as you see it, and any examples that you have, but just take a nice walk through here, please.
I'm very happy to. We picked just 4 aspects here that we could talk about, but the first one is that chief medical officer. The chief medical officer often embodies the links between those stakeholder groups we talked about: investor, patient, company. And most of what they do in a binary outcome clinical development program, preclinical program, even out into the market, is about risk reduction and compliance. Whatever you say, however you put that, whatever you put up on the wall about our corporate mission, what they're trying to do is to risk reduce their way to success. But in a cell and gene company, again, today we're looking at very small patient populations. The chief medical officer probably knows the names of the parents and the siblings of the patients that they're treating in clinical trials.
Wow.
If you're dealing with ultra orphan indications, you're dealing with and such a transformational potential for the therapeutic for usually these kids' lives. That's how close they get. And that means that you blur the lines between who's in the healthcare system, who's in the company, who's the patient. Yeah. We're all doing this thing together. You're trying to do everything you can to ensure that literally every individual patient gets the care and attention that they deserve and need. I think that's really it. It becomes a mission. It becomes a part of your life in a much deeper way than it might in a different kind of company.
You really make that super clear. And so for some of these other areas, how do they compare to traditional pharma?
Well, I think that's where, again, that there's part of this is this belief that this DNA as a software, that the ability to rewrite the code of life. And because of that, the consequences of getting it wrong are the more people die, right? And again, that's true in all production, all development of all drugs, is that there will be side effects, there will be groups of people for whom you can't do this. But we believe especially with cell and gene technologies, that we can control those risks. And so the attention to detail in control, the belief that you can bring things in-house, perhaps start with a CDMO or start with a contract research organization and then bring things in-house, is high. And as service providers, as the CXOs, we have to demonstrate that our capability, what we've learned from serving other cell and gene organizations, means that we are better placed than them. We can be, if you like, their jungle guide. We can help them to avoid the pitfalls along the way. So there's that tension between, we can provide this for you as a service, and we want to control this because of the risks. We want to control this because we believe it is technically, engineeringly controllable. So again, for your interactions with them, it's, I think the biggest one is never lie. When you don't know, go find out the answer. You're not going to get away with it with cell and gene companies in a way you might in a large corporate with a small molecule.
No, it does sound very, very high stakes. And when you were placing these executives, are you looking to some of the service provider companies as sources for this, or is the intensity and educational acumen such that there are other places that these executives come from?
That's a really interesting question. Historically, with biotechs, it's been a fairly insular group of people. So people from big pharma have been seen as bad. People from service companies have been seen as not necessarily the best. People who couldn't make it, people who couldn't deal with the pace. But if you do look at the senior leadership in cell and gene organizations across the planet, what you see is more and more people are coming from big pharma because they have the training and the blue chip background and the process and systems understanding that it's very difficult to learn as you do. So we're seeing a population coming in from big pharma, and I don't know, think Hans Bishop, think going to Juno and driving that. Think I could name dozens, but you see these seasoned executives coming into organizations that don't look as if they're ready to accept them. But in fact, they need them because the pace of growth is so fast that if they were learning on the job or learning anything on the job, they wouldn't be ready to do the job in 24, 36 months time.
Wow. Yeah.
That's a big one.
Great sort of categorization, and kind of sets the bar higher. Just to wrap up quickly, from a financial health point of view and the amount of funding interested in this space, if I'm a BD person and I tell my boss I want to go call in this tiny company that she may have never heard of, can I give some comfort that these guys are going to be really well funded?
They are almost always, the bets are being placed bigger and bigger, and that's because the investors see this as a process, so fund it to the end. So they've almost always got the budget. They just don't want to fail, and they don't want you to fail on their behalf.
Nick, thanks a lot. Super great insights. I really appreciate that, and gives me an even clearer picture of what's in front of us for this opportunity. Well, let's transition to Janelle. And real quickly, guys, we have a question panel down at the bottom, a Q&A tab. If you would like to type in a question, that's where I'll be fielding your questions. So if you do have a question as we go along, please put it in that Q&A session and I will be able to see that. So Janelle, you're in the center of the cell space, and you're engaged on supply chain, quality issues, those types of things. Can you give us a sense of what those engagements look like, and how, looking through that empathy lens, you and your colleagues see things from your point of view?
First of all, Scott, thank you for having me. And it's nice to talk with all of you today. I wish I could see all of your faces, but that's not the world we live in right now. So thank you for having me. But typically what we see, Scott, is our clients start to engage us really when they're starting to plan for that first patient in for a clinical trial, or they are at that pivotal point where they're starting to think about commercialization of the product, and they're engaging us to help them set up those GXP processes in preparation for that. And very similar to what Nick said, they're moving so fast and so furious. They need the guidance and the assistance in helping pull that together in a compliant manner, and in a way that they have complete visibility to what's going on across the organization. When we look at organizations in the past, and even currently today, we've seen some silos that tend to get created within an organization. In the cell therapy and gene therapy space, those can't exist.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think there's a quote on the next slide that sort of captures, directly the types of demands you're talking about.
That's exactly right. Really, I love this quote because it talks to, and it's very specific to the supply chain, but it's just one example of many about how these organizations are looking to understand everything they can about the product. And not only the product as they're manufacturing it from a GXP perspective, but they want to understand the data from the development and how that impacts how they're modifying manufacturing today and continuing to do process improvement, on the manufacturing, all the way through to patient outcomes. So
Yeah.
what is the infusion? What is the patient outcome? And they want all of that data in between. And this is just a great example of one piece of that.
Sure. And given what's at stake, let's walk through some of the key differences that you see, from the traditional to the cell and gene therapy space.
Yeah, so it was really hard to pick, Scott, when we were starting to talk about this, about which pieces of data did we want to really talk about. But I focused on a few that we really see when we start to engage with these organizations. And first of all, they're setting up their own facilities, or they're going to that GXP manufacturing. Typically with small molecule, the investment in an EBR, or a manufacturing execution system, is the benefit does not outweigh the investment. The ROI is just not there. But when you start to move across the spectrum to cell therapy, due to the fact that this can be a very manual process, as well as the fact that you're trying to de-risk the fact that you may not have a viable product at the end of manufacturing, they really want to automate. They want to get to this automation level so that they are taking out the human factor as much as possible in the manufacturing process. The other thing is by automating that process, right, they're allowing the data that's getting generated about the cell and the cell growth to be available to other parts of the organization. They're also allowing transparency to the patients and the providers. Along the way. So when is this product going to be available? Again, we're back to that small patient population that Nick was talking about, and the intimacy with the patient. Well, guess what? The patient's family, they all want to know when that product's coming, right? When is that cure coming? When is that infusion going to be here, right? The provider wants to know because they want to have an idea of when do we need a prep, right? What are some of the things that we need to do in preparation for the infusion with the patient? So this automation is not just because they want to reduce that human risk error. It's also because it provides value in the transparency of the data to the full value chain from a product perspective. So.
Wow. And some key differences in, even how I've been interacting with the sort of pass fail that Nick alluded to in the small molecule world, and just the expectations for transparency. Also a bit of a difference in a very privacy and sort of blinded data world of what we've kind of grown up in, or at least myself. So I hope our audience is taking note of that. And any other sort of thoughts on engagements and where even like some of our audience might come to you and your firm for as they try to enter this space and figure it out? Because I do understand you guys work with, or you specifically as an expert work with CROs and CDMOs too.
Yeah. So, when you start to think about, and I'll use CDMO as an example, right? So Nick talked about or on his slide, he showed where they're bringing manufacturing in-house. They may start with that CDMO, but because they want control and they want to de-risk as much as possible about that process, they're starting to bring that in-house, right? And so they engage with us around that, or they're engaging with us to say, okay, how do I get better access to the information that my CDMO or my CRO has, so that I have that data either from a scientific point of view or from a patient engagement point of view. So that transparency of that data, and how do we automate that flow, right? So how do we think about all the points in that process and automate it? I want to get to the point, and we're not completely there yet, where I'm not just passing an Excel file or getting a PDF, because I want to be able to interact with that data and leverage that data for future insights, right? And on this slide, we talk about, how do I then take that and show transparency to the actual inpatient from a tracking of the product as it goes through the courier, right?
Yeah.
Where is it at? Is the temperature okay, right? Is when it gets to the clinical site and ready for infusion, where did it go within, from a chain of custody perspective within a clinical site? Where is it at today? Is it still controlled from a temperature perspective? Because I don't want to lose that, right, before it gets injected at that point.
Absolutely. So many more variables and great insights. We've got to kind of up our game, but it is a rapidly growing, exciting, mission-driven and well-funded market. So
Yes.
these are the demands and the requirements. So, very, very good insights. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's
All
an
right.
exciting time.
Yeah, and we'll come back with some questions, I am sure. Well, let's go over to Sergio. And again, Sergio's with Advara, and Advara's mission is to be an innovative global partner to clients across the clinical research ecosystem, which includes many of you in the audience today. And they enable safe, ethical, compliant, and efficient drug development for life-changing therapies. Advara offers, IRB and IBC review, consulting and technology solutions to sponsors and CROs and institutions and even standalone sites. But get this, Advara supported 100% of the ethics review and IBC review for the clinical studies that were part of the US government's Operation Warp Speed. So they've been super busy for the past 14 months helping out with these COVID treatments that have rolled out across the world now. But they were the compliance group on Operation Warp Speed. That's super exciting. So Sergio, as you have experienced this, and you have just tons of deeper experience beyond the pandemic, but share some of the differences that you see with cell and gene therapy from the vantage point of what you guys do, and sort of set the stage for how you guys are involved with that.
Sure, thanks, Scott. It's truly an honor to be here, partner with my industry colleagues on this important conversation. 4 years ago, I would be talking to the head of clinical operations, head of regulatory, at a biotech or at a large pharma or at a CRO. And we had just recently formed our IBC division. And I would bring up IBC review and I would get stares. Nobody had any idea what IBC was, right? The only thing they knew is that maybe it was yet another one of these reviews that are pain in the butt institutions made us go through. And so we were in a very unique position to do a ton of education at that point. We were talking before the conference, like 10 years ago, and I forget the exact numbers, but 10 years ago, there were about 250 studies listed on clinicaltrials.gov that contained recombinant DNA and other types of cell and gene research that would require an IBC. Now it's in the tens of thousands, right? There are, we are reaching deeper and deeper and deeper into many different therapeutic and very many indication areas. If you think of what the IBC is, so the IBC stands for Institutional Biosafety Committee. It is an NIH mandated review. Now this gets a little complicated, so pay attention and take notes. If a site has ever received a single dollar from the NIH for any purpose, and they are going to participate in a study where there are certain types of cell and gene research taking place, such as recombinant DNA and mRNA, then they must go through an IBC review for that particular study, okay? Think of IBC, I think, the perfect analogy is think of OSHA. So here in the US, OSHA is a federal agency that was developed to protect people in the workplace. So
worker safety, yep.
Yeah, exactly. So, think of the construction industry, making sure that employees are wearing hard hats. If you're going up above 2 floors, you're wearing a harness. If you are storing fuel on the construction site, certain standards for how that fuel is going to be stored to protect not only the employees working on that job site, but the environment. Well, that's exactly what the IBC is charged to do. It's charged to ensure the safety of the staff, of the subjects, and the environment when certain types of cell and gene research is taking place. if you think about, so, we're looking at recombinant DNA, rDNA, which would include messenger mRNA, synthetic nucleic acid molecules, and really basically any other genetically engineered treatments need to go through these IBC reviews. 2 years ago, if a site didn't ever receive any type of NIH funding, the sponsors were like, okay, well, we're going to follow the rules here, and we're not going to go through an IBC review. You'd be hard pressed now to find a sponsor or a CRO that's willing to take that kind of risk on today, right? Nobody wants to end up on the cover, the front page of the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times because a study went horribly wrong and they realized that at that particular site, they skipped the IBC review because it wasn't quote unquote federally required.
Yeah, selling safety is usually a pretty good bet in our business for sure.
Yeah.
Super helpful, and the analogy there was really good. And wow, what a big change in that aspect of the environment. Cell and gene therapies ushered in all types of changes, and you guys have been at the epicenter of it. I know we had talked about in preparing some of these other areas. You want to go through some of those, and I'm particularly interested in that complexity as it pertains to getting the proposal and the bidding right for trying to know what you don't know, but sort of walk us through your views here, and this will be interesting as well.
Sure, absolutely. So while, and I'm going to piggyback on a lot of what my colleagues here already talked about. I think it all ties in together very nicely. So again, we are charged with reviewing the research site, but, the education really begins at the sponsor level. If, clinical operations, if regulatory, if the folks all the way down to study startup don't understand why an IBC should be used, then it gets difficult to kind of push it down to the site. So a lot of our education starts there. And there are many different types of education. And the education can be, down to the different types of cell and gene research, all the way down to why specific SOPs are required. So if you think of small molecule, very low risk types of studies. There's not a lot, well, I shouldn't say low risk, but lower risk. Yeah. So, the need for doing education is not as high. As you move up the food chain through, the antibodies, recombinant DNA, things such as cold chain considerations, right? Like so kind of an interesting story, right? Maybe 18 months ago, my wife couldn't even tell you what I did. And today I've got the mailman is an expert in, clinical research, right?
We all have become experts.
Absolutely.
Experts
right?
in air quotes.
And everybody could kind of dictate the requirements for cold chain considerations and the transportation and the storage of COVID vaccines, right? But it's an important thing, right? So, we need to make sure that the sites are educated from that perspective. As you move up into the ATMP, personalized medicine, it gets a lot more complicated, There's a lot more to think about, right? And we can talk a little bit more about that later. Things that are likely to delay a clinical study. Small molecule, it really comes down to the patient recruitment 9 times out of 10. Yeah. Do I want a genetically modified protein or cell put into my body, right? Yes or no? Well, it's going to save your life. All right, sign me up. Mm-hmm. As you move into, the more complex, you've got potential manufacturing and supply issues, right? And that's where we bring Janelle into the picture, right? To help her fix those problems. Yeah. Personalized medicine, again, it's so much more complex. It's site training, very complex logistics, especially around the manufacturing. And now down to the budgets. Again, when we take a look at putting together a budget from an IBC review perspective, well, let's start with the IRB, right? The IRB is very predictable. We're going to have one protocol to be reviewed. We're going to have 50 sites, so we have 50 investigators to review. Maybe 30 of those are institutions, so they're going to have their own informed consent language. We're anticipating on this 5-year study 4 amendments. Pretty easy to build that budget out. Small molecule studies are pretty much the same, right? It's not very complicated. Again, as you move up the chain into the personalized medicine, it becomes really, really difficult. Now, it's not so much the budget from our perspective, again, because we're looking at a review as a review as a review, but it's the budget for the CRO, right? Do they have the right people in place? No? Okay, well, now we got to call Nick to bring in some more people. Do we have the correct equipment in place? We were just told by the IBC that that our freezer isn't good enough and we're going to need 3 hoods, right? Like, how do we do that? Who do we call for that? Well, you call Janelle, right? So it gets a lot more complicated. Many of your large institutional sites, this stuff's already in place, right?
Yep.
They have the people, they have the equipment. But as research in this space, and again, we were talking about this earlier, right? Like, we've got foot doctors on our list of sites that are registered with our IBC. Now, they're not going to have the types of equipment needed to do a COVID type of trial, right? But for the most part, they're going to be okay.
That's such a, getting that budget right is such a pivotal part of the sales cycle, and we'll have a lot to learn or to sort of, be cautious and like you said, enlist the expertise of companies like yours, Janelle's and Nick's to make sure the resourcing and planning for this new area is well accounted for, because we have the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns, as they say. So, yeah. What a whirlwind of education here in this last half hour of our session here. So thanks to each of you for that. I want to pass it back to Anne Marie. There's going to be a quiz, and she's going to administer that. So I do hope you guys took notes. No, I'm kidding, but Anne Marie will sort of summarize what some of our follow-ups are going to be. And then we'll move to a Q&A. So if you do have questions, use the question icon down at the bottom tab there, and I'll enlist some of our experts to help out here.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Scott. I could listen to this for so much longer. It's so interesting. So we have some really exciting follow-up material that we'll be sending your way for the people in the audience. And the first piece of that material is all the factors that, the panelists have mentioned today, but even more than that, all of the ones they wanted to mention and then to actually have the time to. So watch for that in your inbox next week for a comprehensive overview of the differences between cell and gene in the legacy pharma space. The other really exciting piece of content that's coming your way, and I don't know, when we put this together, we couldn't find anything like it on the web. So this is, I think, Janelle, you might agree. So this is essentially a map of the whole cell and gene space. You'll recognize a couple of names, some companies you probably know. And essentially this map, I think you've probably never had probably never had a conversation with someone from Zymewire without the word actionable and insights. So this map is really actionable. You'll be able to place the companies that you know in the cell and gene space, and what questions did you have to ask to get to that segmentation, to put that company in the box, and what are other types of questions and companies that are near that box, and what kind of questions will lead you there. And not only that, but we'll also have links for those of you who have Zymewire accounts. There'll be links at the end of these different segments and branches, which there are many, that will allow you to see all of the companies that are playing in a similar space in Zymewire so that you can look at those companies as well. So yeah, really, really exciting stuff coming your way. I think this marks the end of the webinar, Scott. So thanks everybody, and I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, we have some Q&A that I'll go through, but and thank you. And you guys check your inbox for some of these great follow-ups that we've put together. I hope they'll be really helpful as you start to map your own sort of business development efforts into this market. So, you know, one of the questions, possibly no surprise to Sergio, is going back to the IBC, and it was, so if it's contingent on this NIH funding for that review, is there a sense of what percentage of sites, you know, in the current landscape that may be? And then Sergio, I also heard you say that the sponsors are taking sort of the higher, more conservative road too, and saying, irrespective of that, if we're moving into this space, we're going to do an IBC review. But just a little more commentary on that for this question, please.
Sure. So what percentage of sites are, have received NIH funding? If you think of it more of your institutional sites, right? Institutions that are doing a lot of investigator initiated research. So again, it doesn't have to be funding for cell and gene. If they've received any funding for any type of research, $1, they're required. John Smith Clinical Research down on the corner over here, who's working with Pfizer and Merck on their diabetes studies, guaranteed, not required. But again, taking the high road, most likely the sponsor's going to want to.
Yeah, but and then you say though that because some of these vaccine trials had government funding behind them, that sort of as a proxy or de facto makes them now a recipient of government funding.
Yep. Thank you, Scott. So that is the one asterisk, right? So if a sponsor has received funding on a particular compound, so, let's say I'm a sponsor, I've got 20 compounds. If on compound A, I've received federal funding to develop that, but I am now running a trial on compound B, not required. But if I am going to do a study on compound A that received federal funding, then all sites are required to go through an IBC review.
Very good. Thank you. Another question that could probably go, to Nick, but also Janelle and Sergio is, what are the resource gaps you're seeing, both at the personnel or functional role level down to the actual service providers? But what kind of gaps are you seeing in the resources and the demands of this growing industry? And Nick, you might have been responding to that individually, but if you want to share with the group, just sort of verbally.
Yeah, I was starting to, but you're right. There is a tsunami of money there. As you said, it's gone from 200 to more than 2,000 trials. There is a shortage of people at every level and in every function. I see this as an opportunity in two places. The first is for this community here. The CXO world has an opportunity to aggregate that talent and to do what CXOs do best, which is serve more than one master. If you're a company competing for that talent, you may not be able to get it. The other alternative is to go to the CXO. And then I think in those highly technical and compliance-driven roles, this is where you need people. So you need a clinician to prescribe an unlicensed medicine to a patient. That's called a clinical trial. You need great people in CMC and in manufacturing scale-up. You need fabulous people in all of the compliance functions, and all of those people are in high demand, and there aren't enough of them who've done it before to do the job. That gives opportunities in two places. It gives you an opportunity to grow. If you are prepared to put in the work, find a mentor and step up, you might find your career accelerates very quickly. Or if you decide to move, you might find that your income accelerates very quickly.
Very good. Thank you. And then Sergio, I'm thinking about Advara has just been on an acquisition tear, buying companies and new solutions and things like that. Is that part of sort of filling some of the gaps in service capability that your company's seeing at a corporate level?
Sorry, I was stuck on mute there. It's famous last words over the last 14 months, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, right. So again, we want to ensure that it's not that they've got, that a site has the right facilities, but the right people to be able to oversee what's happening at that particular site. Credentials and training and certification, it's all required. If somebody has certain credentials that are lacking, we may most likely push the pause button until they can get that done.
Well, like your acquisition, was it Longboat? I mean, does that play a role in kind of filling a gap of training and sort of the step through? I'm just thinking out loud there, but I know you guys have been pretty acquisitive, and it's obviously to open new markets. But that seems like maybe one that is going to fill a hole that you guys have seen.
Absolutely, absolutely. Being able to track and manage investigator and staff training across multiple sites, across multiple borders, across multiple different studies. Like Janelle talked about, using Excel spreadsheets is just not going to cut it anymore, right? It's getting too complex, especially, the more complex the studies are getting in. So, the Longboat platform that, yes, we did recently acquire allows sponsors and CROs to be able to manage that investigator training and protocol compliance across multiple compounds, right? And being able to report on that and manage that, to ensure the two sides, right? To ensure the protection of the patients, the staff, and the environment. And quite honestly, to protect the company. If you have a COVID vaccine and all of a sudden you're having a bunch of problems, the first thing that, or not the first thing, but one of the first things that the FDA is going to look at in that data is they're going to look at the training.
Yeah.
And the training records, right? And you better have that in order. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then Janelle, in that supply chain and regulatory and some of the manufacturing things you're focused on, any big gaps that almost present like a service provider opportunity that you're seeing on a consistent basis?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Nick covered them a lot too, which is the CMC and the manufacturing space, as well as IT, and really understanding the digital landscape that needs to be put into place to support the data and the movement of the data kind of across the board. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here for CDMOs and CROs to step in and provide that capability to their clients.
And when you talk about that digital aspect, is that sort of that logistics end to end of being able to track and as you said, sort of put a stethoscope on each part of the process and know exactly what's going on?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And when Sergio was talking about the Excel spreadsheets, I was using that as an example earlier, that baton can't get passed through Excel spreadsheets anymore. There's just too much information and too much data. It also doesn't provide the right visibility from the specific to cell therapy, from the donor material to the infusion in the patient. And they want that digital landscape that shows that across the board.
Very good. Well, team, I'm going to start to wrap up now. If we had a couple other questions, like specific markets, like the Asia market and things like that, we will follow up individually on some of those. But I really want to thank Janelle, Sergio, Nick, really appreciate the insights and the time and the preparation that went into that. Thank my team at Zymewire for the work to put this together. And you guys out there in the audience that are really looking at this market and figuring out how best to approach and be the best partner that you can be. So thanks to everyone for taking out a bit of your time today. Look, as Anne-Marie said, in your inbox for some really great follow-ups from this. We think, beyond this hour, you're going to have some tools and some summary material that you can continue to use. So with that, I will say thank you, and we will begin to sign off. Thanks, everyone.